Good morning, everyone. My name is Brian Cahill, and I'm the Vice President of Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. And I'd like to welcome you to the panel that we're going to have about engine technology. Fortunately, I was able to have dinner with our speakers last night, and I think there's a lot of exciting things happening with the auto industry and engine technology. And I think we'll hear a lot about the value of ethanol, and particularly octane, in some of the presentations we're going to hear. Our first speaker is Tom Apostolos. Tom is president of Ricardo Incorporated, the North American subsidiary of Ricardo PLC, one of the world's leading technical and strategic consulting firms. Before joining Ricardo, Tom was with Magna International, where he served as president of Magna Automotive Interior Company. He also has held engineering and management positions with General Motors. I'd like you to welcome Tom.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's going to be a big challenge to follow the governor. The lieutenant governor did an outstanding job. But I hope to try to keep the technical engine mumbo-jumbo down to a minimum. And I can tell you, I really appreciate the invitation, so I want to really thank the organizers for the invitation to speak, and of course the sponsors for supporting this great event. At an engineering level, something that Ricardo is very passionate about is the ability to use sustainable fuels to power vehicles on a go-forward basis. But on a personal level, I'm also the son of a farmer, and I understand how important it is to the socioeconomic requirements for the state. So first, I'd like to give you a little bit of a brief on who Ricardo is, because you may not be familiar with our company. Then a small brief on how engine development is going to shape up in the future and why that's important for ethanol and how that plays to ethanol strength. Then I want to talk a little bit about a use case where we did a demonstrator vehicle to try to highlight the benefits of ethanol, and it's really some surprising results in terms of performance relative to diesel and gasoline. So for nearly 100 years, Ricardo's been focused on developing technology and innovation that pushes boundaries and challenges convention. Harry Ricardo, our founder, was fooling around with gasoline engines back in the early 1900s and developed a very, very strong affinity for how combustion works and the science of combustion. Our heritage was really in powertrain development, but today we operate as a global company, over 2,200 employees in the Americas, Europe, and Asia, primarily engineers. And we operate in three areas that give us sort of a distinct difference. We operate in transportation, in clean energy, and in the environment. We're one of the very, very few companies that stitches all three of those key areas together. If you focus on our transportation business, we deliver to our clients from concept development, engineering, prototype, test and development, manufacturing, engines, transmissions, hybrid electric vehicles. We do vehicle engineering. We have a suite of software tools that model and simulate how transportation is supposed to work. We also have strategic consulting, and we have an environmental arm we call Ricardo AEA. We operate in a diverse array of market sectors. So you would see our products in things like Formula One, motorsport, in passenger cars, off and on-highway commercial vehicles, defense industry, motorsport, rail, marine, clean energy, and of course, as I mentioned earlier, environmental engineering. Just to give you a brief of who some of our clients are, a real array of some of the world leaders in all their respective market segments. So before I get into the specific use case, I want to talk a little bit about our heritage with ethanol, because it goes back quite a long way. Our founder, Harry Ricardo, had used and marketed in the mid-30s ethanol-based fuels, racing fuels, which we sold under the Cleveland Ricardo Disco brand. And he, along with his contemporaries at the time, had really anticipated some of the issues that we see even today. depletion of petroleum reserves. Both Henry Ford, Charles Kettering, one of the key technology leaders at General Motors, and Harry Ricardo, all were proponents of ethanol fuels. Henry Ford expected the biofuels would strengthen the rural economy. Charles Kettering had planned to help the auto industry avoid oil shortages, which would have limited its growth. And Sir Harry Ricardo hoped to promote national energy security through the use of ethanol. And all three of them knew that ethanol was an anti-knock additive. So almost 90 years ago, we were selling ethanol-based racing fuels. Work continues today. The questions really include what's the ultimate fuel economy you can drive from downsizing vehicles, and where is the sweet spot for octane? So if we look at the current internal combustion engine, that's what ICE stands for, technology, and ultimately what we expect in the future to be our low carbon propulsion systems, there's a couple of things that are going to happen naturally. First of all, over time, there's going to be continuous improvement in evolutionary technologies. The thermodynamics of an engine, there's still 60% or so performance left in just standard combustion engines. So you look at the things that will happen. Well, we're going to drive some efficiency. We're going to get better at being efficient thermodynamically, but also more and more today you see uses for turbochargers and superchargers. Engines are getting smaller. They have to get smaller, not only to pull weight out of the vehicle, but also to drive fuel efficiency. And you'll see things like stop-start systems now to try to hybridize vehicles and, of course, try to get energy recovery out of vehicles. Also, you're going to see cross-sector innovation as we start to apply tools used in aerospace, apply tools used in motorsport to try to make, again, vehicles more efficient, reduce weight, try to drive efficiency. And ultimately, you would expect to see disruptive technology, something that we aren't onto technology pathways today to try to, again, get vehicles to a point where they have low carbon propulsion systems. And you'll note low carbon sustainable fuels is one of these key enablers. And ultimately, ethanol is a fantastic example of something that is low carbon and sustainable that ultimately would drive the engine technology pathway forward. So what does that mean in relative, and why would that make sense? Well, if we have to shrink an engine size and we have to turbocharge it, there's some very key enablers and very key strengths that ethanol brings to the party. First of all, a smaller optimized engine takes weight out of the equation. Injecting fuel directly into the cylinder, ethanol has a cooling effect, which allows you to run higher compression ratios and get more fuel efficiency. And then ultimately higher octane fuels drive those positive properties, and ethanol is a perfect example of something that really lends you the freedom as an engine designer to push the limits of what efficiency and performance that you'll get out of an engine. We'll talk a little bit about what we did. So Ricardo has always believed very strongly in the ability to be able to use ethanol. So we went out ourselves to try to build a demonstrator, and we took a very, very strong, very, very forward-looking approach to it. Our intent was to take a 6 or 7 liter diesel engine out, replace it with a 3.2 liter spark injected engine, and then use extreme boosting and direct inject fuels to try to match that performance. And effectively, we were looking at as a platform that we could build an engine for not only passenger cars, light-duty trucks, and also potentially off-road agricultural construction vehicles. So we developed this engine running basically on the basis of E85 and compared it to diesel and compared it also to gasoline, and really expected that it would run a powertrain optimized to run on a number of different fuels, pump fuels, including E85. Just to look at the ultimate outcome, what we found was boosting that engine with direct injecting created some very significant performance enhancements, and that E85 was competitive with gasoline and competitive with diesel, not quite as fuel efficient. And in the 3 bar charts you see there, one is city driving, FTP 75 is city driving, US06 is what I would call aggressive highway driving, and then FHET is highway cruising. And we see that ethanol, E85, is a little less fuel efficient, 1 or 2 miles per gallon. But the important thing is these vehicles weren't optimized on a transmission basis to be able to gather the best outcome from ethanol. It was the standard transmission in the vehicle with a different engine. The important thing is that if you look at that green line, the green bar, when running E85 in a highly boosted environment, which means 2 turbochargers, the ethanol-driven, E85-driven engine, less than half the size of the diesel engine, gave you a diesel-like torque curve. And by doing that, it gives you a tremendous amount of flexibility to be able to set up a vehicle to be able to give you a very, very broad, a lot of low-end torque, and it really gives you a lot of hope to be able to take these blends of ethanol and be able to apply them for use cases in light duty, in construction vehicles, in off-highway vehicles, and in agricultural vehicles. So really, in conclusion, what could you draw from the discussion? Well, first of all, the future fuel economy targets in the U.S. are going to require significant changes in engine technology. We've got to get smaller, we've got to draw more efficiency out of them, and we've got to get vehicles lighter. It's not going to be answered by electrifying vehicles. That's not the answer. It's a niche solution, but ultimately, internal combustion engines are going to drive vehicles in the future. And they're going to remain a very material part of what's going on highway and off-highway vehicles. Engines are going to have higher specific power. And they're going to use technology like direct injection. They need to use technologies like turbocharging. And they need to have higher compression ratios. So what does that mean? Well, ethanol, its properties make it possible to match diesel efficiency in a highly boosted engine by means of downsizing. And when you have that wide torque curve, you can change your gear ratios in your vehicle to start to make up some of the lagging fuel economy numbers. So fuel powertrain solutions are going to have a natural thirst for higher octane fuels, and that falls right into the sweet spot of ethanol. So in conclusion, we built this vehicle, we put it out in the market, we drove it, clients have driven it, and there's still room for further sort of high-end engine development in ethanol. And the interesting thing will be the best way to convince someone that it's the right type of fuel is to throw them the keys and let them drive the vehicle and use the vehicle and prove it to themselves. So ultimately, I'm hoping that as we sit here in the audience today, those of you who are interested in trying to prove to your clients or to use ethanol more extensively in your fleet portfolio, come talk to me, because I think there is going to be opportunities to do that in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Do you need that? Thank you, Tom. We're going to adjust our speaking mics here, but we're pleased to have our next speaker is with Chrysler Group. Jim Frusti is the Manager of Energy and Fuel Affairs for the Chrysler Group, LLC. He is responsible for fuel regulatory compliance, development, and advocacy of corporate positions and policy relating to energy and fuels. He also oversees the collaborative fuels research activities throughout the U.S., Council for Automotive Research, the Coordinating Research Council, and the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers and various government agencies. Please welcome Jim Frusti.
Thanks, Brian, for that nice introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here to share some time and talk about some things and some perspectives from Chrysler, and more about alternative fuels. We took a little bit broader look, not just at ethanol and biodiesel, but all alternative fuels. As this morning began and I was pondering one of the questions that Steve, the opening speaker, shared, he asked how many were advocates, and then he listed various ways that you could be an advocate, whether you were a producer or had various categories. None of those questions fit me so that I couldn't stand up to say I was an advocate. So I started to ponder my own situation at Chrysler. My responsibility is fuels or fuel affairs. So I deal with any kind of fuels. I deal with gasoline, I deal with diesel, I deal with ethanol, biodiesel, I deal with CNG, hydrogen, electricity, so all of those fuels. But 90 to 95% of my time is spent on biofuels. And most of that time is on ethanol over the last 5 years. I'm an advocate. And you will see how Chrysler is an advocate of biofuels through my presentation as I share here this morning. So, many have called and continue to call for an 80% reduction in greenhouse gases. And they're expecting that by 2050. But in order to get there, there's got to be some pretty extensive things to happen. That includes things like vehicle efficiency improvements. We got to get the carbon out of fuel. We got to keep the customer at the top of the heap because he's the king and it's his acceptance that we've got to recognize. And we need government support. From an efficiency improvement standpoint, we need higher quality fuels. Key words. We want higher quality fuels. And the kind of quality we're looking in the fuel from our perspective is octane. Another one is the carbon content of the fuel. I've talked about that. But it's not just as it relates to the vehicle. It's a lot of upstream activities as well in terms of what's the carbon that's used or gone into the environment as they're making those fuels, whether it be the refiner or an electrical plant and its use and the CO2 that goes in the air, or even the production of hydrogen. So no matter the fuel, you need to look at the whole thing, including that upstream, and in terms of the carbon of the fuel. Also, customers must embrace new technologies and fuels, and then we need government policies or incentives that target fuels, infrastructure, and customer acceptance. And that must be coordinated, of course. So, from a corporate perspective, and for that perspective, a broader perspective besides corporate, we need sustainability when we're talking about alternative fuels. From an economic standpoint, we need cost-effective regulatory compliance. These are the kind of things that we face day in and day out. We've never faced such an onslaught of new regulatory requirements in the automotive industry as we are facing right now. We have the greatest challenge, the far greatest challenge with CO2 and CAFE, bar any kind of regulations we've had in the past 30 years. The greatest. It is a daunting challenge for us. We also have things like ZEV mandate for California, as well as the coming Tier 3 and LEV 3. Of course, as we're thinking about economic stability, we have to also make sure we provide the customer value in terms of the utility of the product and providing it in such a way that it provides a minimal cost of ownership. Another thing is social responsibility. We need to protect the environment, less greenhouse gas emissions and improved air quality, energy security, reduce petroleum use. I heard it over and over again, to reduce our dependence on foreign oil and on oil in general, and increase the use of renewables. And we need to have jobs across America. And that's powered by an expanding alternative fuel industry. I'll share with you that I've seen a lot of commercials in my hometown just outside of Detroit that are produced by API, and they all talk about jobs. They're pretty effective commercials. We need the same kind of commercials in the alternative fuel industry or the renewables or the ethanol industry. I saw some commercials at the beginning of the program today. Those were great. I called them commercials. Maybe they're just videos, but those could be turned into very effective commercials that would be nice to run across the country. I don't see this. The first time I ever saw something like these videos, I was impressed. Those are the kind of counter ads we need to the ads that the oil industry are putting out there about jobs, because you guys care about jobs just as much as everybody else does. And I heard from, I think it was Lieutenant Governor Kim Reynolds, talking about how many jobs are potentially in jeopardy right now in either the ethanol or biodiesel. And those jobs, whether it's the loss of jobs or more importantly, the jobs that can be added, are the things that need to be really brought up by the ethanol industry, and spend some bucks and put some commercials out there. So to achieve long-term goals, we emphasize a system approach, the vehicle and the fuel. You can't just do it with the vehicle. We need to say that you got to concentrate on total life cycle effect, and there needs to be an increased attention paid to the carbon and fuel equal to that which is paid to the vehicles. I talked a moment ago about our daunting challenges we have with greenhouse gas emissions. That's all about CO2 emissions. That's all about the carbon. We have our job. We need to make sure that the fuel industry has an equal play in that role. And then alternative fuel drivers, there's the curation. We need to do the right research to enable the production of commercial viability alternatives, and distribution, adequate infrastructure, and use. And this comes back to the customer again. Affordable, where it's cheaper than gasoline or diesel. And I think there was a question a little while ago here about energy parity. And how do you make sure that as you're thinking about energy parity, like E85 versus E10 fuel, because there is an energy difference and there's a mileage hit. There are ways that potentially we could more effectively communicate to the person who pulls up to the pump and says, do I pick E85 or do I pick E10? And that's a thing that's done in Brazil, where Brazil actually tells you when it is more opportune for you to buy E22 or E100 based on what's the economics of that very moment. Could we not do something similar like that in the United States? So, what are some of the major obstacles, or what I call the big rocks, as it relates to any alternative fuel? One is overcoming the resistance of the existing energy providers. They have great leverage. And I think I've heard it sometimes this morning already about their ability to control what's actually pumped at the retail stations, whether it's through franchise agreements or whether it's by virtue of their power and the activities that occur in terms of standard setting activities at ASTM or National Counts and Weights of Measure. There are so many ways that they are so powerful in terms of how they can affect what happens in the alternative fuel industry. Another big rock is providing enough or strategic incentives to enable a sustainability of that alternative. In other words, we need to get over the hump. The question is, are we over the hump with ethanol? I don't think so. We were talking a little earlier, and we'll spend some more time about RFS in just a second here, but it's critically important right now that certain things that are in place stay in place as they were designed to operate. Another thing is government policy. Our actions must be transparent, direct the use of performance-based standards, and treat all alternatives equally. Now, as it relates to specifically renewables and biofuels, before I was coming to this presentation, my director, who in fact I'm subbing for, said, Jim, why don't you pull together a list of some of the things that have happened with some of the incentives we have had for ethanol. And on that note, I listed here some of the demise of the ethanol incentives. First is the one that is staring us right in the face and has been talked about a lot already this morning, is what EPA is proposing for RFS. The original program was designed to really move renewables, including ethanol and biodiesel, but that proposal does not look too attractive for 2014 for the renewable volume obligations. The volumetric ethanol tax credit expired. Small ethanol producer credit expired. Second generation producer tax credit expired. alternative fuel infrastructure tax credit expired. Special depreciation allowance for cellulosic biofuel plant property set to expire later this year. What's left? The government is failing us. I'm talking federal government here. From a vehicle manufacturer perspective, we care a lot about credits. We look for any way, shape, or form what we do in terms of the design of the vehicle, or what we might get in terms of government incentives or credits for which we may build that makes sense in terms of CO2 credits, for instance. Well, the CAFE credits are scheduled to phase out by the end of 2019, and they're decreasing rapidly by 0.2 per mile per gallon per year. And the CO2 FFV credits and related usage factor will reduce the incentive for auto manufacturers to continue to produce FFVs. All of the auto manufacturers are very keenly aware of what's happening in the whole FFV front in terms of encouragement from the government for us to continue to produce FFVs. So the key challenge is maintaining the current renewable fuels momentum with the rising uncertainty, rising political uncertainty, and the fading incentives. I want to flip it over now just for a minute, instead of talking about all the grim stuff, and talk a little bit about things that are happening from a more positive perspective. The National Academy of Sciences has had their comments on vehicles with biofuels. And they say that cellulosic biomass is most promising. Chrysler has been working closely with the cellulosic industry and trying to promote that because we think that's the long-term solution. And we think in the corn industry you have a thing that works very well in this category, and it's called Stover. Drop-in biofuels can be produced from cellulosic biomass without major changes in delivery of infrastructure and vehicles. Of course, this is according to the National Academy of Sciences. And drop-in fuels coupled with high-efficiency internal combustion engines or hybrids could be a major contributor to the reduction of petroleum use and greenhouse gas emissions. Another important player here is the Department of Energy. Department of Energy is bullish on alternative fuels, and they talk about a lot of things. They talk about hydrogen, they talk electric, CNG, or other alternative liquid fuels. But quite nicely recently, they've placed a great emphasis on biofuels. And in fact, they reorganized their EERE team to include an emphasis on bioenergy. So this is an opportune time for us to expand or focus on cooperative government industry research and funding for low carbon fuel research. And as Tom said, that's an important thing that we need to be really focused on going forward. Political support can be useful. We think that over the last year and a half, there's a lot of negative policy on renewable fuels. But there's a need to get the right story in front of Congress. And we need to leverage people like NAS and DOE and their views and actions on biofuels and encourage DOE research in this arena. So from an auto perspective, alternative fuels, what are our targets? Probably the most important target right now is lowest emissions and best emissions performance in future engines. Of course, that's supported by our call, or a call for the product and fuels. The vehicle, elements of a well-designed, which enables improved efficiency through downsizing, boosting, and higher compression ratio. All of the things that Tom talked about, he laid out all kinds of things that we're doing to actually improve efficiency from a fuel economy perspective, but also help with greenhouse gas emissions and CO2 emissions. From a fuels perspective, we're looking at higher octane, renewable, and low carbon, and higher octane ratings by any possible new alternative fuel. We recognize that ethanol is a dominant player in the alternative fuel business and would love to see it succeed. But as an auto industry, we're going to take a look at what continues to provide a pathway for us to meet the kind of targets we have and still do some fundamental things right for this country. To measure the alternative fuel impact for creation and distribution and use, we focus on the life cycle effect. This next slide here just sort of summarizes the major elements of life cycle, whether it be well to tank, tank to wheels, and ultimately well to wheels. Well to tank creation and distribution, and tank to wheels mainly from a use perspective and energy or engine efficiency. Down this diagram, most of this diagram talks about the upfront piece, looking at whether you're coming through the oil side of the house and that oil production, transportation, and on the biomass side, the transport, production, and transport of that as well. Ultimately coming to what happens on the blending, transport, and dispensing. So all of that diagram there basically is the kinds of things that go into the whole well to tank. And at the very bottom of that slide, there's the word in blue is vehicle. That's the use part. But I'm not going to focus a great deal on this other than to say that this is the kind of things that we are actively doing in a lot of different arenas at U.S. Car and U.S. Drive, as well as with CRC, the Coordinating Research Council, looking at how to examine the total life cycle effect of various fuel pathways. So, our directional performance requires high octane, low carbon fuels. And an example for achieving this goal for a liquid transportation is ethanol. So we'll look a little bit more at ethanol, just briefly. And when we look at the life cycle effects for creation and use, we find that at least for the refinery crude oil use and CO2 emissions, they decrease with higher ethanol content and increase with higher octane. And even though it increases with higher octane, it's only by 1 to 2% for like a mid-level blend of ethanol. From an engine effect standpoint, we care a lot about fuel knock. We care about how fuel works in the combustion chamber and how well it burns and what kind of effects are occurring in that cylinder. And so with the ethanol that could be introduced, we have improved knock resistance, evaporative cooling improvement with increased ethanol and corresponding octane increase. A key word, the ethanol with the octane. If we're going to bring more ethanol to the marketplace, we have to have the octane there, and we have to be assured that that octane will be there with it. That is not a small statement. There is a big concern about how we ultimately get the octane in the field. It's probably the biggest thing that we are of great concern right now. There isn't an auto manufacturer out there today that doesn't know that octane is good. It goes way back. It goes back, in fact, even to the 20s and the 30s and the 40s and the 50s when we first were developing internal combustion engines in a big way. Octane is good. There's no issue about that. We've done plenty of studies. We don't need to do more studies on octane. We need to convince one group. They need to make a decision. And you all know who it is. It's EPA. And a like story. Maybe you know what, and have watched what's happened with sulfur. It took a long time for the sulfur levels to come down in the United States. And there was a huge battle a number of years ago on diesel sulfur. They wanted to get the sulfur down and out. And there was a big fight from the oil industry. But eventually that came down. And because EPA ultimately changed the fuel property requirement in diesel fuel down to 10 parts per million. Likewise, the same thing is going on right now as we speak and is about to come out in the Tier 3 rule on gasoline and sulfur. EPA is finally getting the guts and the stomach to do the right thing for sulfur and bringing that down. The next big thing we need from EPA to do, and we need to do this in a smart way, and we got to work with the EPA and work with the relationships we have with EPA, is to make sure that we set a new requirement for octane. A new higher minimum floor for octane that can be enabled by a thing called ethanol. It's simple. It's not a complicated story. But that's the story we ultimately need to get to them, and showing exactly what we can get from the octane. We have plenty of data, whether it be from Ricardo or any of our manufacturers, or if there was a, last week in Washington, D.C., there was a high octane fuel symposium put on SAE, all about octane. There's plenty of data. The data is there, the substantiation's there. Let's go take that story to EPA and say, let's raise the floor. We need to raise the floor so that we can design our future engines so that they can, in fact, use that ethanol with a higher octane, and the octane is there. That's a simple story, but that's what we need. And I forgot to talk about the rest of the slide, but higher ethanol octane also enables higher engine compression, increases engine efficiency, and reduces CO2 emissions. It does all the right things. Just a recap, we need a system approach for vehicle and fuel, and it's needed to obtain optimal solutions for CO2 emissions. The primary reduction in CO2 emissions and petroleum use comes from things like renewable, low carbon fuel. Ethanol is a great example. And so that it can displace fossil fuel. This requires fuel capability in vehicles as well as infrastructure, and we need a comprehensive implementation plan, much to what I was talking about, how to get EPA to do the right thing with octane. So win-win solutions are possible with, for lower cost, lower CO2 emissions, and lower petroleum use. And that can be accomplished with hydrocarbon fuels, ethanol, or some combination of those two, or other new fuels in optimized engines. So just some summary points for policymakers, because I work in more of on the regulatory arena and deal with more with policy, I've sort of made this whole pitch a little bit more about what's the bigger picture. From a policy standpoint, the talking points that we need to get on, back on the right track to the federal and state levels. Following what we've already done to date with the science and research, like I talked about, whether it be for octane fuels or whether it be for life cycle effects on CO2 emissions, we need to take that story and need to press that point on alternative fuels. We are already pressing the energy carrier, the vehicle, to its physical limit. Now we need low carbon energy sources. Some key messages for alternative fuels: decrease the carbon and improve fuel quality. See, I think if we focus on improved fuel quality, nobody can object to improved fuel quality, including the oil industry. Key words: improved fuel quality. How do you improve fuel quality? Increase the octane. Those that we want to engage with and do it collectively or collaboratively is the alternative fuels industry, OEMs, and energy providers. So with that, I'll turn it back to Brian.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. We've got some time to open it up for some questions. If you want to go to the mic, if anybody's got any questions. I guess maybe I could start it off. Both of you, what would you say is the optimum octane that we could meet in the gasoline supply? If we say 87 is the lowest right now.
I don't know if we actually have a precise number. It comes with, what are you going to be, is this on? Okay. It actually comes with looking at what level of ethanol and what you can do with the existing bobs and how do you make those work together. From a RON or a research octane number, that number could be as high as even 98 or 95, and that might be a number to be looking at. But it's really dependent upon, well, what is your base fuel that you're putting in there, and what are you mixing with in terms of gasoline to come with an actual number. Just higher is better, and we don't have an optimal number at this stage, at least.
Yeah, just to build on what Jim said, I would say that it's very use case specific. So vehicles are engineered to be very efficient at specific octane levels, and of course, if you don't have the minimum number, you can break your vehicle, you can break your engine. So there is no simple one-number solution. I think it's very specific to the engine that's being used and how it's been calibrated.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
My name's Warren Pitcher, an investor in ethanol plant in Nevada, Iowa. I think my question, I would first start with Mr. Frusty with Chrysler. Not only am I an investor, at one time I thought I wanted to own and operate an independent convenience store. I got over it. My question is, I think one of the solutions to our ethanol blend wall and increased use of ethanol is if we had a proliferation of flex fuel vehicles, not only in Iowa, but nationwide. My typical customer was not able to afford a brand new automobile, be it flex fuel or otherwise. So in order to have some 5 to 10-year-old flex fuel vehicles that my typical customer might be able to afford, at this time of year, 50, 60 cents a gallon difference in fuel when he's getting his home heating bill, those of you that are on propane know what that's all about. I know they're price conscious. I had a convenience store on the north side of Des Moines, and I'd have people go past my drive for 2 or 3 cents a gallon. I would love to have had a convenience store where I had product that was 50 to 60 cents cheaper than my competition. So back to my question, how would Chrysler and other automobile manufacturers make the decision of what percentage of new equipment is going to be flex fuel? You alluded to some, maybe even some federal tax credits to influence how many FFVs Chrysler would manufacture, but I'm just trying to stress that this E10 or E15, we wouldn't have to worry about that if by magic I could declare every vehicle in Polk County was a flex fuel vehicle. You would have an immediate increase right now with, like, say, a 50 to 60 cent gallon of gas savings. They don't do the engineering math, realizing, well, I'm going to lose so many miles per gallon. They know that tank's on E. They've got to get to work, and they can see a 50 to 60 cent a gallon savings. I think it'd be a no-brainer. You would see such an increase in E85 consumption in this state if they were driving a vehicle that could accept it. How do we get Chrysler and others to have a higher percentage of FFVs?
There's a couple things that go into this thing. It's actually threefold, I think. One is what we do in terms of providing vehicles, as you indicated. There's also the infrastructure needed. If, in fact, you have 100% of the vehicles on the road with FFVs, yes, that might cause a drive for what happens in terms of more retailers, in fact, putting more pumps in, but you need to bring along the infrastructure at the same time. In this area, I think I heard there's something like 30 or 40 stations that pump E85. That's a pretty high percentage, and with a lot of FFVs, you can move a lot of ethanol here. You go back to where I'm from, and just out of Detroit in Canton, and you got to look a little bit to find an E85 station. So if immediately I could, with a snap of a finger, put E85 across the country, it still would stay. You better start finding some retail stations that are going to start pumping a lot more E85. So it comes together. And the other thing is consumer education. I think that's the third main stool. There is a strong need for people to understand the benefits of E85. And when it comes to energy parity, what's the right time and under what circumstances you ought to consider buying that. So there's a whole consumer energy element. So there's actually three things that need to get addressed in your question. It's not just a fundamental, okay, let's do it overnight. I'll say also that there are aftermarketers out there that actually do their bit to reconfigure older model vehicles with FFV. We're not overly excited about that because that's something that we don't oversee as manufacturers. But there are people out there putting kits on to actually make FFVs. So, if that answers your question a little bit.
Go ahead.
Robert White with the Renewable Fuels Association. One of the things we're hearing from EPA now is the reduction in their proposal is based on infrastructure, both with vehicles and retail. One of the things, Jim, what we're facing is consumer knowledge, as you mentioned, and looking at what the automakers are telling them they can and can't do. Do you have any timeline on when Chrysler will begin explicitly endorsing E15, at least in recent model years, as GM and Ford and others have done?
I don't have a timeline, but I
Okay.
will say that this guy sitting in this chair right now has a major obligation on his shoulders to address that in a big way and get busy about making sure we do the right thing on E15. Our competitors, GM, Ford, and VW, all have 100% of their vehicles now E15 capable 2014 forward. And that goes back a couple years for GM. And Toyota and Land Rover and Jaguar have a good percentage of theirs. And so they've been taking a little bit more of a phase-in approach. We're looking at both of those as actively as I speak, and it's a very important topic to Chrysler.
Good to
I
hear.
don't have the timeline, though.
Thanks,
But,
Jim.
okay.
Thanks, Jim. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Scott Hedrick with RAG, and I've got to admit I'm a little bit confused, but it could be because I'm a biodiesel guy and I'm listening to ethanol. But so I hear the discussions around the move towards higher compression engines that need higher octane, whether it's just to produce a better product, to comply with potential future CAFE standards, to comply with potential EPA standards. I've heard a lot of discussion around that we're moving in that direction. And then I heard the discussion today, it's an area we need to look at. We need a cleaner fuel, a tremendous role for ethanol to bring this higher oxygenate product in. So at the same time, though, we've got our friends in the oil industry putting through lower octane material in the pipe. You've got, at least in the Northeast, a long history of 94, 95 octane super premium fuel being available. And while I would suppose having great margin opportunity for the sellers, really doesn't move in any significant volume. So what I see is I won't use the word train wreck, but certainly there's a clash coming here where there seems to be a demand for higher oxygenate, higher ethanol. At the same time, oil's lowering what they're delivering, and we can't even seem to get over the E15 hump. So I guess my question is, do you see the same kind of conflicts out there? And then if you do, how do we get over it? And if you don't, I guess my question would be, why not?
I guess maybe I can take, first of all, just to be clear about engine technology, it's happening. Highly boosted, higher compression engines are happening. It's the main technology roadmap for all people producing engines. So it doesn't matter whether you're talking about an on-road vehicle or commercial vehicle or even stationary power generation. That's happening, and the characteristics that are being built and designed into those vehicles play to ethanol strengths. At the end of the day, there needs to be the political will and the commercial might to do the right thing. And ultimately, I think that's what your question really revolves around, because it would seem pretty easy to draw the conclusion that ethanol should be on the uptake and higher, perhaps E85, even E100. There are reasons to use it not only for passenger cars and commercial vehicles, but tractors, combines. All the technology exists, the performance exists. Why not use it there also? It's a difficult question to answer because the arithmetic doesn't work. It doesn't work for me anyway.
I just want to add in that I see the train wreck. I see it every day and live it in terms of working with the oil industry and the existing energy providers. There's a major challenge. I work in a thing called the Coordinating Research Council, and that Coordinating Research Council is made up of autos and oils. And we tend to do things a little too incrementally in that environment. We do some nice research and a little bit here and a little bit there and tweak things, but we don't need tweaking right now. We actually need a very strong statement from somebody like EPA that sets a new standard for a higher base floor for octane. Simple as that. And that's, the oil industry will fight that tooth and nail, but that's where we need the direction from, I think.
Okay, I think we got time for one more question, if you want to go ahead.
Hi, John Norwood, TBL Ventures. You haven't spoken much about biodiesel, higher blends of biodiesel, what some of the performance benefits might be of that, and also methanol. That's the other one I'm curious about.
First, maybe I'm going to turn to Tom in just a second about maybe the technical benefits, but as it relates to the biodiesel and what Chrysler is doing at least, we've recently, in the last year and a half, from our 2013 and then 2014 models, have substantially increased our biodiesel capability from B5 to B20 on all of our Cummins diesel engines, and our new 3-liter diesel that we're just coming out with here in 2014. So we have a large percent of our diesel engines up to a fairly high high number of B20 capability. So we are actively moving forward with biodiesel in a big way, and I feel very good about that direction we're headed. Want to say anything else, Tom?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Let's go ahead. Last question.
Thank you. A quick question. On the Ricardo engine modification where the diesel engine was replaced with a Ricardo modified engine, is that a Ricardo engine totally, or is that a Ricardo modified production engine? And if so, what production engine was it based on?
Yeah, it was actually a crate off-the-shelf 3.2 liter. It was the original engine was the GM Duramax. I think it was 6.8 liter diesel, and we went with basically what was the base architecture was a gasoline engine. So it was not anything special. What was special is how we turbocharged and delivered fuel, because I think it's been mentioned that ethanol is slightly less, is definitely less energy. So to get the horsepower and to get the torque, you have to pull more fuel into the vehicle. But it was nothing unique. It was not rocket science. It was just a base spark-ignited 3.2 liter engine.
From a General Motors engine?
I believe it was a General Motors architecture.
Okay.
Again, I'd like to thank our expert speakers today, Tom Bapistalis from Ricardo and Jim Frusti from Chrysler. A lot of good information. Appreciate you being here and giving us a lot of information. Thank you. Let's hear a hand for them.